Do you want something from me too, cowboy? The Arapaho girl's quiet question. The sun was beginning to set over the vast, open plains of Wyoming, casting a golden glow over everything in sight. Yana stood at the edge of the river, watching the water flow gently around the smooth stones. She was an Arapaho girl, her long dark hair blowing in the breeze, her face calm and thoughtful. She had grown up here in the wide-open spaces where the sky met the earth in endless horizons. It was a place of quiet beauty and peace, but it also held a deep history, a history her people had lived for generations. Iana's life was simple, yet full of meaning. She had been taught the ways of her people from a young age. She knew the importance of the land, the animals, and the traditions that had been passed down through her ancestors. Every day she went about her tasks quietly, gathering herbs, helping her mother, and learning the old songs and stories that had shaped her tribe. She had always been quiet and reserved, preferring the company of nature to that of the other children in her tribe. They would often laugh and play, but Ayana would stay by herself, lost in the rhythms of the land. That afternoon, as the breeze rustled the leaves of the trees along the riverbank, something caught her attention. She could hear the sound of footsteps, soft and slow, coming from the direction of the distant hills. Iana had been trained to be alert to such things, to notice the smallest sounds in the wilderness. She turned, her keen eyes scanning the horizon. There through the tall grasses she saw a figure, a man. He was walking slowly, his back slightly hunched from weariness, and his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. At first she thought he was just another traveler passing through. It wasn't uncommon for strangers to come through the plains, though most kept to the main roads. But something about this man seemed different. There was an air of tension around him, a sense that he was carrying more than just the weight of his belongings. Yana's instincts told her that he was someone who had been through hardship. She stood still for a moment, watching him approach. She was far enough away that he didn't see her, but close enough to observe his every move. The man didn't seem to notice her at first. He was focused on the ground ahead of him, walking with the kind of slow, deliberate pace that came from exhaustion. Yana felt a stir of curiosity, but also caution. Her people had always been wary of outsiders, especially those who came without warning. The plains were wild, but they were also sacred, and not everyone understood the respect that the land and its people deserved. She knew that it was important to approach this situation carefully. As the man drew closer, Ayana stepped out from behind a tree, her bare feet making no sound on the earth. She stood tall, her posture straight, but her expression was neutral, her face unreadable. The man looked up then, his tired eyes meeting hers. For a moment neither of them spoke. It was as though the world had paused, holding its breath. Finally, the silence was broken by Yana's quiet voice. "Do you want something from me too, cowboy?" she asked. The words came without malice, but there was a hint of suspicion in her tone. She had asked the question before, not just of him, but of many outsiders who had come into her life. Her people had been taken advantage of too many times, and she had learned to guard herself, to protect the quiet peace of her home. The man blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting her to speak. His eyes widened as he took in her appearance, the long braid of dark hair, the worn but well-kept clothes she wore, and the strength in her posture. He had expected to encounter a quiet, helpless girl, but instead he found a young woman whose calmness and authority were immediately evident. He took a step back, as if uncertain how to respond. I don't mean any harm," he said, his voice low and hesitant. "I was just passing through. I didn't expect to see anyone out here." Ayana continued to watch him, her eyes never leaving his face. She was assessing him, trying to determine whether he was someone she could trust or someone to be wary of. The plains had a way of revealing people's true nature, but sometimes it took time for that truth to surface. "I've seen you," she said, her voice softer now. "You're tired. You've been walking for a long time." The man nodded slowly, looking down at his boots. "I've been on the road for days," he admitted. "I lost track of where I was headed, just trying to find a place to rest." Iana didn't respond immediately. She knew the land well enough to know that there were places where travelers could find shelter. But there were also places that could be dangerous for those who didn't respect the wilderness. And as much as she could feel sympathy for him, she couldn't let her guard down too easily. Her gaze softened slightly, but there was still a hint of challenge in her voice when she spoke again. "You can rest here," she said, "but you'll have to prove you're not a threat. My people protect this land. The man looked up, meeting her steady gaze. He could see now that she wasn't just a quiet girl. There was a depth to her, a quiet strength that he hadn't expected. He could tell she wasn't someone who would be easily fooled. "I understand," he said. "I'm not here to cause trouble, I just need a place to rest." Yana considered this for a moment, then gave a slight nod. "Follow me," she said, turning and walking away. "I'll take you to a safe place." As she led him toward the small camp where her people were setting up for the night, the cowboy followed quietly behind her. He couldn't help but feel a strange pull toward this girl. Her calm presence seemed to soothe him, even as he struggled with his own turbulent thoughts. They walked in silence, the sun sinking lower in the sky. Yana's movements were graceful, almost effortless, as if she were a part of the land itself. The cowboy, in contrast, stumbled now and then, his weariness catching up with him. He wanted to say something, to ask her about herself, about her people, but he held back. He had learned the hard way that questions were often met with silence in places like this. When they finally reached the camp, Ayana stopped and turned to face him. "You'll be safe here for the night," she said, "but remember the land speaks to us. If you do anything to dishonor it, we'll know." The cowboy nodded, his face serious. He wasn't sure what to make of her warning, but he felt an undeniable respect for her. She was no ordinary girl, and he had a feeling that the question she had asked earlier, "Do you want something from me too, cowboy?" wasn't just a question about him. It was a question about everything he had been running from. For now, though, all he could do was rest and try to find a way forward. As Ayana turned and walked back toward her people, the cowboy sat down on the ground, feeling the weight of the journey lift off his shoulders, at least for the moment. And as the stars began to appear overhead, he couldn't help but think about the quiet question that had started this strange encounter. What did he really want from her? And what was he willing to give in return? The following day, Yana led the cowboy, whose name was Jace, deeper into the heart of her people's camp. The morning sun shone brightly over the plains, casting long shadows behind the tents and wagons of the Arapaho tribe. The camp was a peaceful sight. The women were busy preparing food, the children played near the river, and the men were gathered in quiet conversation, discussing the needs of the tribe. The air was filled with the sounds of nature, chirping birds, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the soft hum of the wind. Jace could feel the difference between the calm of this place and the chaos he had left behind. The camp was simple, but there was an undeniable peace that settled over him as he followed Ayana through the site. Her movements were purposeful, confident, and yet there was an ease in the way she moved among her people. It was clear that she belonged here, and the respect her people had for her was visible in their quiet nods and smiles as she passed. Ayana stopped near the edge of the camp where a small fire burned. She turned to Jace and gestured for him to sit. "This is where you can rest," she said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was something in her eyes that made it clear she wasn't inviting him to stay for any longer than necessary. Jace sat down, grateful for the chance to rest his tired legs. He looked around, taking in the scene. The camp wasn't what he had expected. It was much more than just a place where people lived. It was a community, a family. He had seen many places in his life, but none quite like this one. The people here didn't just exist. They thrived together. Every person had a role, every movement seemed deliberate, and there was a sense of connection to the land that Jace could feel even though he was an outsider. He watched Ayana as she moved away to speak with her father, a tall, strong man who had the look of someone who had seen much of the world and learned from it. Her father looked like he carried the weight of the tribe's traditions, and when he spoke, others listened. Jace knew he would have to speak with him if he wanted to stay here longer than a day. As the day passed, Jace spent some time observing the people of the camp. There were no signs of hostility, no rushed movements, only the steady flow of life that seemed to exist on its own terms. The tribe wasn't rich in the ways of the world he knew, but there was a wealth here, a wealth of knowledge, of tradition, and of respect. Yana came back to him after some time. She handed him a small bowl of stew made from meat and vegetables and sat down beside him without saying a word. Jace took the bowl gratefully and tasted the stew. It was simple but full of flavor. The warmth of it seemed to fill him with energy he hadn't realized he was lacking. "You've been walking for a long time," Yana said after a moment, her voice still quiet but direct. "Why are you here?" Jace hesitated. He hadn't expected to be asked that question so soon. He hadn't even fully thought about the answer himself. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. He had been running, yes, but from what exactly? He had come out here to find something, but now that he was here, he realized he wasn't sure what that something was. "I'm not sure," he said honestly, looking down at the bowl in his hands. "I guess I'm looking for a place to rest, to stop running." Iana studied him quietly, her dark eyes unreadable. She didn't say anything at first, just nodded as though she understood. Her gaze flickered over the camp, then back to him. "You're welcome to stay for a while, but you must know that here, we respect the land and each other. If you wish to stay, you must earn that respect." Jace nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and unease. He wasn't used to having to earn his place anywhere. In the world he came from, he had learned to survive by moving quickly, by never staying too long in one place. But here, with Iana and her people, he felt something different. It wasn't just about survival. It was about belonging. And though the idea of belonging to something scared him, he also felt a desire to understand it, to see if it could offer him the peace he'd been searching for. That evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, the camp came to life in a different way. The fire was lit in the center of the camp, and the people gathered around it, sharing stories, songs, and food. Jay sat quietly at the edge of the gathering, observing the way the tribe interacted. The sound of drumming filled the air, and the rhythmic beat seemed to pulse through his body. The flames danced in the center, casting shadows on the faces of the people, and Jace couldn't help but be drawn into the warmth of it all. Iana sat beside him, her presence calm and steady. "This is where we honor our ancestors," she said quietly, her eyes focused on the fire. "They are the reason we are here, the reason we live this way." Jace glanced at her, intrigued by her words. "You believe in that, in the spirits of your ancestors?" Iana didn't look at him, but her voice was firm when she answered. "Yes. Our ancestors are always with us, guiding us in the ways we live. They are in the wind, in the trees, in the animals. They are part of everything we do." Jace nodded slowly, trying to grasp the meaning of her words. He had never thought much about ancestors, about spirits. But something in the way Iana spoke made him wonder if there was something he had been missing all his life. As the night wore on, Jace felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. The sounds of the camp, the laughter, the singing, the crackling of the fire, it all seemed to wash over him, soothing his restless mind. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to simply be. Iana's voice broke the silence again. "You can stay here for now, but remember there is no place for those who bring harm to the land." Jace turned to her, meeting her gaze. There was something in her eyes, something deeper than just a warning. It was a promise that the land would always protect those who respected it, but it could be unforgiving to those who didn't. "I understand," Jace said softly. "I won't bring harm." Iana nodded, her expression softening for the first time. She stood up and began to walk back toward the center of the camp. Jace watched her go, feeling a new sense of responsibility building inside him. Perhaps this wasn't just about running anymore. Perhaps it was about finding a place where he could finally belong. As the night deepened, Jace sat alone by the fire, contemplating his past and his future. He wasn't sure what the days ahead would bring, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he might have found something worth staying for. The days that followed were peaceful, but Jace knew it wouldn't last. His time in the Arapaho camp had given him a sense of calm, but the world outside was still a place of danger, a world he could never fully escape. The soft hum of everyday life in the camp, the quiet laughter of children, the rhythmic beating of drums at night, the simple yet beautiful rituals that marked each day, had begun to heal a part of him. But the world he had come from still lingered at the edges of his mind. Iana continued to watch him closely. She had seen many strangers come and go, but there was something different about Jace. He wasn't like the other men who had come through the plains, always looking for something or running from something. Jace didn't have the arrogant air of those who believed they could conquer this land. He had a quiet sadness in his eyes, a weight that he carried without saying a word. And though he had said he wasn't sure what he was looking for, Ayana couldn't help but feel that the answers lay somewhere deeper, somewhere inside him. But Ayana knew better than to ask too many questions. Her people had always valued patience, and she wasn't going to push him. She understood that people had their own struggles, their own burdens, and sometimes all it took was time for them to begin to open up. One afternoon, as the sun was high in the sky and the camp was at its busiest, Ayana and Jace sat by the river's edge, watching the water flow over the rocks. The sounds of the camp were distant now, replaced by the gentle rush of the river and the occasional bird call. Iana had become used to Jace's quiet presence. Though he didn't speak much, she had noticed the small things, the way his shoulders relaxed when he was near the river, the way he would stare at the horizon as if searching for something just beyond it. Jace broke the silence. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he said slowly, his voice low and thoughtful, "about earning respect." Iana glanced at him, her expression neutral but curious. "What about it?" she asked. Jace looked out over the water, his brow furrowing slightly. "I'm not sure how to do it," he admitted. "I'm not sure I've ever earned respect before." Iana didn't respond right away. She could tell that this was hard for him to admit. Most men she had met in her life had always seemed sure of themselves, even when they were hiding something. But Jace wasn't like the others. He wore his uncertainty openly, like a part of him that he couldn't quite hide, and that made him different. "You don't have to earn it all at once," Iana said, her voice soft but steady. "Respect isn't something that's given immediately. It's built little by little through your actions, through how you treat others." Jace nodded slowly, though he still seemed troubled. He had been running for so long, trying to escape his past, that he wasn't sure how to start anew. The cowboy he had been, the man who trusted no one, the man who had learned to survive by taking what he needed, felt like a lifetime ago. But as much as he wanted to leave that life behind, he didn't know how to step into a new one. Iana stood up and began to walk slowly along the riverbank. Jace followed her without thinking, his feet moving of their own accord. She led him to a small grove of trees, where the shadows were cool and welcoming. Here, the air smelled different, heavier with the scent of pine and earth. Iana knelt down and began to collect some herbs from the ground, her movements fluid and practiced. Jace watched her for a moment, his eyes following the way she moved with such certainty. There was a grace in her actions, a confidence in her ability to work with the land. She was so connected to this place, so at home with the rhythms of nature, that it seemed like everything around her was part of a greater whole. "Here," she said, standing up and offering him a handful of herbs. "These will help you clear your mind. They're good for focus." Jace took the herbs from her, surprised by the softness of her touch. "Thank you," he said, unsure of what else to say. He had never been one to show gratitude easily, but something about the way Iana offered him these simple gifts made him feel as though he was receiving more than just herbs. She was giving him something he had never asked for, something that he didn't even know he needed. As they walked back toward the camp, Iana spoke again, her voice quiet but strong. "The land doesn't judge you based on your past. It doesn't care about the mistakes you've made or the things you've done. It judges you by what you do now, by what you're willing to give in return for the peace it offers." Jace nodded, his mind racing. He had been so focused on the things he had done wrong, the choices he had made in the past, that he had forgotten that change was always possible. The land, like Iana, was offering him a chance to start again. But it would take time, he knew that, and it would take patience, something he was still learning to practice. That night, as the camp gathered around the fire once more, Jace sat a little closer to the others. He had spent much of the past few days keeping to the outskirts, unsure of where he fit in. But now he felt a small spark of connection. He wasn't just an outsider anymore, he was part of something bigger than himself. Iana sat beside him, her eyes watching the flames as the fire crackled and popped. "You'll be here for a while longer," she said, her tone more casual than before. "But you have to remember that trust is earned just like respect. You can't expect it to come without giving something in return." Jace looked at her, her face illuminated by the firelight. There was a quiet strength in her, a steady confidence that he admired. "I'll try," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "I want to do what's right." Iana gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Then you'll find your place here," she said, "but you have to be patient with yourself, too." Jace leaned back, staring up at the night sky. The stars were clear and bright, scattered across the heavens like diamonds on black velvet. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. There were no answers yet, no clear path forward, but there was something here, something in the way the land held its secrets and the way Iana spoke of it. It was as if everything he needed to understand was already waiting for him, if only he could be still enough to listen. As the night wore on, Jace found himself drifting into a quiet sleep, the warmth of the fire and the sounds of the camp lulling him into a rare sense of calm. He wasn't sure what the future held, But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was running anymore. The days grew warmer as summer stretched over the plains, and Jace found himself falling into a rhythm. He woke up early each morning with the sun, helped with the chores around the camp, and spent hours learning about the ways of the Arapaho people. There was a peacefulness here that he hadn't known before. It was different from the noise and chaos of his past life. The Arapaho lived simply, but their lives were rich with meaning. Every action, every ritual had a purpose. It was a life Jace never expected to find, but had come to appreciate more with each passing day. Still, even as he adjusted to his new life in the camp, a part of him felt unsettled. He wasn't like the others here. Iana had made it clear that he had to earn their trust and respect, and though he tried his best, he wasn't sure if he was truly succeeding. There were moments when the people around him looked at him with curiosity, but also with caution. His past hung over him like a shadow, and he wasn't sure how to move beyond it. It wasn't just the men from his past that he was running from. It was the weight of his own mistakes, the things he couldn't take back. Jace had tried to push those thoughts away, focusing instead on what he could control, the present, the work in front of him. But there were still moments when his mind wandered back to the life he had left behind. The memory of the harsh desert winds, the loud, angry voices of the cowboys he had once traveled with, and the loneliness of always being on the move haunted him in quieter moments. It was one such evening, as the camp settled down after a long day, that the peace he had found began to crack. A small group of cowboys arrived on horseback, kicking up dust as they rode into the camp. They were loud and boisterous, their presence demanding attention. The camp had always been a place of calm, but these men brought an air of tension with them. They weren't like the others who had passed through, men looking for rest or refuge. These men looked like trouble. Yana's father, the leader of the tribe, was the first to approach the group of cowboys. His face was stern, his eyes sharp as he sized them up. Jace stood at the edge of the camp, watching the exchange, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He recognized the type of men who had just arrived, men who thought they could take whatever they wanted, without consequence. The cowboys dismounted and began to speak in loud, exaggerated voices, boasting about their travels and their triumphs. They made no effort to be respectful to Yana's people, treating them as if they were nothing more than a curiosity. Jace could feel his blood begin to boil. It reminded him too much of the arrogance he had left behind. The way they laughed at the customs of the Arapaho, the way they looked down on the land and the people who cared for it, it all brought back the worst parts of his past. Yana's father, though, didn't seem fazed. He stood tall, his voice steady and firm as he addressed the cowboys. "This is our land," he said simply. "You will show respect here or you will leave." The cowboys laughed, clearly amused at the older man's words. "Respect," one of them sneered. "What do we owe you people?" "You're just a bunch of savages living in the past." Jace's heart raced. He wanted to step forward to say something, but he held back. This wasn't his fight. He wasn't part of this world, not yet. But as he watched Ayana's father stand there, unwavering, something in him stirred. He had spent so much time running from his past, but now, seeing these men disrespect everything he had come to admire, he felt a strong urge to defend it. Yana stood nearby, her gaze fixed on the cowboys, her body tense. She said nothing, but Jace could see the anger in her eyes. She was no stranger to the disrespect of outsiders, but that didn't make it any easier to bear. The confrontation continued, and the cowboys seemed determined to push the Arapaho people into a fight. But Ayana's father didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. He simply repeated his words, steady and calm. "You will show respect," he said, "or you will leave." Jace couldn't take it anymore. Without thinking, he stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "They're right," he said, his voice low but firm. "This land is worth respecting, these people. They know more about the world than you ever will." The cowboys turned to look at him, their sneers turning into looks of confusion. They didn't expect Jace to speak out. He had been quiet, reserved, almost invisible since he arrived at the camp. But now he found himself standing between the Arapaho and the men who had no idea what they were dealing with. "Stay out of this, cowboy," one of the men growled, stepping toward Jace, but Jace stood his ground. He had spent so many years running from trouble, but this time he wasn't going to back down. He had found something here, something worth protecting. Yana stepped forward beside him, her presence calming but powerful. "Leave," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "There's nothing for you here." For a moment, the cowboys hesitated. It was clear they weren't used to being told what to do. But slowly, one by one, they turned and walked away. They mounted their horses, muttering under their breath, but they didn't argue. They left the camp, their presence fading into the distance. Jace let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He had stood up for something for the first time in years, and it had felt right. The camp was quiet again, the tension lifting as quickly as it had arrived. Iana's father nodded at him, a silent acknowledgement of his bravery. Iana, too, looked at him, her eyes softer than before. "Thank you," she said simply. Jace nodded, his heart still racing. He hadn't expected to act like that, but he felt something change in him. He had stood up for this land, for these people, and for the quiet strength that they held. In doing so, he had finally begun to earn the respect he had been seeking, not from the others in the camp, but from himself. That night, as Jace sat by the fire, the camp once again settled into its peaceful rhythm. The stars were bright above, and the soft crackling of the fire filled the air. For the first time since he had arrived, Jace felt at home. Not just because of the land, but because he had found a place for himself in it. He wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was part of something bigger than his past. Yana sat beside him again, her gaze on the fire. "You did well," she said quietly, her voice filled with approval. Jace looked at her, surprised by the warmth in her words. He wasn't used to being praised, but in this moment it meant more than he could say. "I just did what needed to be done," he replied. Yana smiled, a small but genuine smile that lit up her face. "That's what matters," she said, and in that moment Jace realized something. He hadn't just been running away from his past, he had been running toward something. Toward redemption, toward the chance to make things right, even if it was just in small ways. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The days turned into weeks, and Jace settled into his new life in the Arapaho camp. The peaceful routine of the tribe became a part of him, and he no longer felt like an outsider. The land, the people, and the quiet ways of life began to fill the emptiness he had carried for so long. He woke up each morning to the sounds of nature, the rustling of leaves, the soft calls of birds, and the hum of life around him. In the evenings, the camp would gather around the fire, and Jace would listen to the stories, the laughter, and the songs that filled the air. It was a way of life that he had never imagined, but now he couldn't imagine living any other way. Iana had become his closest companion in this journey. Though she still kept a certain distance, she had opened up to him in small ways. They spent many quiet hours together, walking along the river or sitting in the shade of the trees. Yana had a way of making him feel at ease, of showing him the world through her eyes. She had taught him how to gather herbs, how to track animals, and how to listen to the land. Every lesson she shared felt like a gift, and Jace began to realize how much he had missed in the world he had left behind. The noise, the rush, the constant movement, it had all drowned out the simple beauty of life. But despite the peace he had found here, Jace couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something he couldn't avoid. He had been waiting for the other shoe to drop, for his past to catch up with him. It had always been that way. He had learned to live on the run, to never settle for too long. The land had given him peace, but he knew that peace could be fleeting. It wasn't long before his fear became reality. One morning, as the sun was just beginning to rise, Jace heard the sound of galloping hooves in the distance. He stood up from his bedroll and listened carefully, his heart racing. He recognized the sound immediately, horseback riders, many of them, moving quickly across the plains. Jace's gut clenched with the familiar tension. He didn't have to see who they were to know they were trouble. The pounding of hooves was enough to tell him that a group of cowboys was on its way, and this time they were coming for him. Jace's first instinct was to run, to leave the camp before they could find him. He had been running for so long that it seemed natural to slip away in the night, to disappear into the wilderness once more. But something stopped him. He thought of Iana, of the life he had built here. He thought of the land he had come to love. He couldn't leave it behind, not again. He turned to Iana's father, who was already standing by the fire, his expression unreadable. The man had seen many things in his time, and it was clear that he had sensed the danger long before Jace had. "They're coming for you, aren't they?" Iana's father asked quietly. Jace nodded, his heart heavy. "I don't know what they want, but I can't let them bring harm to your people." Iana's father didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached into his pouch and pulled out a small, intricately carved knife. He handed it to Jace. "This is a gift from our people," he said. "You have shown us respect, and now it's time for you to show us how far you are willing to go to protect what you have here." Jace took the knife, feeling the weight of it in his hand. It was a beautiful weapon, crafted with skill and care. But it wasn't just the knife that weighed on him, it was the gesture. This was a sign of trust, a sign that he had truly become part of this community. And with that trust came responsibility. He wasn't just a man running anymore. He was a man with a purpose, a man who had found something worth fighting for. The camp had already begun to prepare for the arrival of the cowboys. The women gathered their children and the men readied themselves, each one taking their place with quiet determination. Iana stood beside Jace, her expression calm but resolute. "We fight together," she said softly. "This is our land and we will protect it." Jace nodded, his heart swelling with a sense of duty. He wasn't sure what the coming confrontation would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't running anymore. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was standing for something bigger than himself. The cowboys arrived soon after, riding hard and fast, their faces twisted in expressions of greed and anger. They didn't speak right away, but instead pulled their horses to a stop and surveyed the camp. Jace could see the arrogance in their eyes, the way they looked down on the Arapaho as if they were nothing more than obstacles to be dealt with. Yana's father stepped forward, his voice steady and powerful. "You are on our land," he said, "and you will leave or you will face the consequences." The cowboys laughed, but it was a nervous laugh, the kind of laugh that came from men who weren't as confident as they pretended to be. They weren't expecting resistance. They thought they could simply take what they wanted and leave without a fight. But the Arapaho weren't the kind of people who would back down. This land had been theirs for generations, and they weren't about to let anyone take it from them. Jace stood with them now, shoulder to shoulder with the tribe. The cowboys looked at him, recognizing him from earlier, and sneered. "You're one of them now," one of the men said, his voice dripping with disdain. Jace didn't flinch. He met the man's gaze with quiet determination. "I'm not running anymore," he said simply. The confrontation that followed was brief but intense. The Arapaho moved with precision, each person knowing their role, each one standing together as one. Jace found himself at the center of it all, fighting alongside the people who had given him a second chance. He wasn't a cowboy anymore. He wasn't a man on the run. He was part of this land, part of this community, and he would do whatever it took to protect it. In the end, the cowboys were forced to leave, their pride bruised but their will to fight broken. They rode off into the distance, muttering threats under their breath, but it was clear they wouldn't return. As the camp settled back into its quiet rhythm, Jace stood by the fire, his heart still racing. He looked at Ayana, who was standing nearby, her gaze steady but full of pride. She had been right. This was his fight too. This land, these people, they were worth protecting. Yana walked over to him, her eyes soft but full of understanding. "You've earned your place here," she said quietly. Jace smiled, feeling a sense of peace that he hadn't known was possible. "I didn't just earn it," he said. "I found it." And as the fire crackled in the night, Jace realized that he had found something that he never thought he would. A place where he could belong. A place where he could stand tall and be proud of the man he was becoming. The past no longer held him in its grip. He had stepped into a new life, one filled with purpose, with respect, and with the quiet strength of the land he had come to love.